to Piper's 1-year video. In previous videos, I know I've been talking a lot about soft diffused light, but I want you to know that you can take amazing photos in the bright sunlight too. I live in California, so it's inevitable that I'm going to be taking pictures at the beach, and hopefully the sun is going to be out. So here is how I would approach shooting some incredible shots in the bright sunlight. And no, you don't have to have a beach to get shots like these. They can be taken at a lake, at a park, or even in your backyard. First thing, because I was dealing with such bright light, I wanted to make sure my ISO was set very low. My ISO for this series of shots was set to 160. Even at such a low ISO, I was still getting shutter speeds around 3200th of a second. That's just how bright it was. I also think this is a fun time to break out some sunglasses. If your child will actually keep them on, it can really be an added bonus to the shoot. It adds a fun element to the photo, and it really eliminates any chance of squinty eyes or shadows. I would recommend shooting about 2 hours before sunset. One thing you want to avoid when you're shooting in the sun is you don't want the sun to be directly overhead. This is what creates those nasty dark shadows under the eyes and all over the face. If you get the sun at the right angle, it will light up all the features of the face just beautifully. When you're shooting in the sun, this is the perfect time to just let your child play. A lot of times, if they're looking directly into the camera, they're going to be squinting and the sun is going to be blinding them. So have them interact with the sand with dad or with a friend. This is also a great time to break out one of your longer lenses. Take a step back. Let your child play, jump, run in the water, play in the sand. It's a great time to practice getting some action shots. And you know that you're going to have plenty of light to use those fast shutter speeds. As the sun started to get a little bit lower in the sky, we sat Piper down in the sand, we took off her sunglasses, and I was able to get some more direct shots of her face, but you can tell from the photos that the sun was still just a little bit too bright. Another thing you have to deal with when shooting in the sun is your shadow. So as the sun gets lower and lower, your shadow will get longer and longer. So a lot of times you'll have to get down at a very low angle so you can get your shadow out of the shot. So just keep moving around until you find the perfect position. It's really fun shooting an hour before sunset. You get to see the light actually change before your eyes, and you get to take advantage of all the different aspects of what they call magic hour. After shooting for about 25 minutes, the sun came to that perfect angle in the sky where I knew it was time to get some backlit shots. As I've talked about before, you don't want the sun coming directly into your lens unless you're going for a sun flare or a very kind of artistic look to your photo. If you just want a nicely exposed face with the backlight behind them, you want to make sure that the sun is at an angle where it's not coming directly into your lens. When you're shooting in backlight, always remember to expose for the face. The background and the highlight on the head is going to be really bright, but you still must always expose for the face. Because the sun was now behind Piper, I knew that I was going to have to change my exposure. The light on her face just wasn't as bright. So I ended up changing my shutter speed from 1/3200th of a second to 1/800th of a second. And I left my f-stop at 2.5 and my ISO was still at 160. If you've ever wondered how to get those shots where the sky is completely white, here is all you have to do. It's basically a backlit shot. What you want to do is make sure that the sky is the entire background. Then, when you expose for your subject's face, the sky gets completely overexposed and just goes white. I love the simplicity that this kind of image creates. It's all about the subject, and I especially love how it looks in black and white. Now we've finally reached that point in magic hour where the light is truly magical. It's a really soft, warm light. The sun was just on the verge of sinking into the horizon. The sky was absolutely beautiful, and Piper's skin was just glowing. When it gets like this, I get really giddy. I set my exposure and I just start snapping away. But one thing you really have to be careful is that this light fades very, very fast. So I check my exposure every couple minutes.
Let's summarize a little bit about what we learned about shooting in bright sunlight. First thing, make sure you're shooting with a low ISO. Shoot 1 to 2 hours before sunset to avoid shooting with the sun directly overhead. Shooting in sunlight is a great time to break out a longer lens and get some action shots. Shooting in the sun is a great time to let your subject really play and interact with something besides your camera. When you're shooting in backlight, remember to always expose for the face. And when you reach that amazing point in magic hour, remember that the light fades really quickly, so always be checking your exposure.
For the second part of this shoot, we moved inside to document Piper doing some of her favorite things. I shot these piano shots with my 50mm 1.2. I knew that I wanted a very simple background, so I decided to put the window behind Piper. I knew then that when I exposed for her face, the window would just blow out and just create kind of a white, simple background, and Piper would be able to pop out and be the star of the show. I love the high key effect to these images. I also, because the light was very soft and diffuse and Piper wasn't getting any direct light on her face, I did have to have a fairly high ISO, and I shot pretty wide open as well. For the horse riding shots, I decided to move Piper about 5 feet over to the left, and instead of having the window behind her, the window was actually in front of her, illuminating her face. So I was definitely dealing with a brighter light. I decided to close down my f-stop to a 2.8. I knew that shooting at 1.8 and having her moving and rocking was going to be very hard to get it in focus. So remember, when you're shooting something that's moving, you might want to consider stopping down just a little bit. I was shooting at about 2.8.
Good girl. Where's Mama? Horsey.
Piper's room was a little bit darker than the playroom, so I did have to bump up my ISO to about 1250, and I had to open up my lens again to f1.8. I just love the image of Piper with the big book, with her little eyes peeking over the top and her little toes coming out underneath the bottom. It will always remind me of just how tiny she was. I really recommend buying some sort of flash diffuser. I was using the Gary Fong light spare, which I absolutely love. What a diffuser does is allows you to diffuse the light, creates a softer light, and it allows you to bounce the light off of a ceiling or a wall. When I'm using a diffuser, I like to use it at a 45-degree angle on my camera. That way, it's great for horizontal shots, and it's easy to flip when you want to take a vertical shot. As for my camera settings, I had my flash set to TTL, which is basically an automatic flash exposure. But just because my flash was going to automatically expose, I still wanted to be in control of the exposure of the background. One thing to remember when you're shooting with flash is your shutter speed is what will ultimately determine the exposure of the background. So if you don't want a dark, yucky background, make sure your shutter speed is slow enough that it will let in enough light to properly expose for the background. Your f-stop will be what will ultimately control your flash exposure. I set my ISO to 320 and my shutter speed was coming in at 1/160th of a second, and my f-stop was 3.2. When you're shooting with flash, one thing that's so nice is you don't have to worry about the shutter speed freezing the action of your subject. The flash is ultimately what will freeze the action of your subject, not the shutter speed.
Let's summarize a little bit about what we learned about flash. Shoot with a flash diffuser. This will help create a more natural look to your pictures. Even though you're shooting with an automatic flash exposure, be sure to always control your exposure manually in the camera. Remember, you can use slower shutter speeds when shooting with a flash. Remember, if you don't want a dark background when shooting with flash, you can always bring in the background by adjusting your shutter speed.
That pretty much sums up Piper's 1-year video series. I just want to thank you for going on this journey with me. I cannot believe that it's been a year. I hope this is just the beginning of your photography journey. Enjoy your family, take tons of photos, and hopefully we'll get to meet someday.